Welcome everyone present and future. I'm here finally. I'm a little bit late. I just left work at 6 and got home and had a yogurt, and now I'm ready to dive in. Let's get started. I had hoped to do more prep work for this than I had time for. So we'll see how far we get. This is the GitHub page for Robin Sloan's Perfect Edition. And I will, maybe I'll just paste a link in the chat for all of you all. And I will show you the demo in case you haven't seen it already. I really like this idea. This is really well executed. It's a single kind of a HTML/EPUB template that is made for pros, for extended pros. It's usable on a phone. It makes your web browser act like an ebook reader. And it's got this nice text block. And you can use the space bar to page forward. You can click on the left and right margins to page forward and backwards. And if you have a phone, you can swipe. Actually, you can scroll horizontally on your trackpad if you have a nice trackpad. And it comes with an EPUB template. Now, we're a little bit hamstrung with the EPUB template because I do not have a device that can use an EPUB file. So I do have the Calibre app on this computer, which can read an EPUB file. So that might be, if we get that far, that might be our litmus test for whether what we've done is achieved functional parity with Robin's original creation. So these are the files. You see that Robin has written it in Ruby programming language, and of course the goal of tonight is to rewrite a new version of this project to use Pollen. And you can see that under source, the entire text is in a single markdown file, and it's basic markdown. So you've paragraphs of prose with an occasional heading, and you might be wondering, well, what are we going to get by converting this thing to Pollen? I was wondering that because there's from a perspective of what you end up with, there's not a lot to improve on here, and especially given that it's just straight up very simple. Only a small subset of markdown is being used here, so the HTML that we're generating is not going to be very complex. Pollen really, the advantages of Pollen become apparent when you have a need for markup that does complicated things, especially custom markup. So when we get done, assuming we are successful tonight, at least in creating a web version of this, there will be no special wow features that we get from being in Pollen. However, if you wanted to use this for your own project, and you did want to use some more advanced features of markup that Pollen allows, you would be able to do that. I think probably to start, I'm going to use Pollen's markdown mode just so that I can quickly test using Robin's example content here. So let me get started with that. And now, as you think about and what makes this attractive to try and do in one evening, I should say as well, is that all the web design work has been done for us already. Robin has essentially even a template and the CSS for us. Let's take a look at that template. I'm opening another program in the background there. Let me zoom in on it here. Love Robin's header comments. He's always good at those. Let's look at what kinds of things he's inserting into this template. He's looking for a title. I see that here. He's looking for an author, a home URL, a cover image, a description. There's a Twitter username. So these are things that we don't necessarily need to get started with, but if we were going to have complete feature parity, we would want to be able to define those things in our project. That shouldn't be hard. He has some JavaScript here, and he has a GUID. Not sure what I think about that. I probably will simplify that somewhat, but maybe that'll change when I have a chance to look at the CSS. There's a lot of JavaScript here for the page turning functionality. That's all great and wonderful. And now here we have kind of the crux of the matter. It looks like the title HTML goes in this spot, and then the entire body of the book goes right here. So this should be pretty straightforward to convert to a Pollen template. Now I want to test some things for myself before I do that. I want to test, because it's been a while since I used Pollen's Markdown mode. So, in fact, let's take a look again at the Markdown file that Robin uses for the script, and let's look at the raw file. So, heading 1, heading 2, occasional small tag. Let's just paste this right in to Dr. Racket at this point, and we will just run this. This is a program, Pollen program. Let's run it and see what it does. Might take a little while to get going. Okay, here we go. So in Pollen's Markdown environment, just simple Markdown with some embedded HTML tags produces this X expression. And it does, the main thing I wanted to check is, like Pollen's markup mode, as opposed to Markdown, it does still put a root tag at the beginning. I was curious about that. And Pollen is also doing something that I'm suspecting Robin had to do by hand, which is insert IDs into the heading tags. Each of these heading tags has an ID that you can use to jump back and forth. One area that might bog us down a little bit is in generating the table of contents, but I also suspect that portion of it will be streamlined somewhat by the fact that this work is already being done for us by Pollen, which in turn is actually having, I think it's Greg Hendershot's Markdown reader is doing that for us. So, laying Pollen Markdown. Okay, so that works fine. Let's do this. I am going to create, well, why don't I just save this into our project directory. Code, calling this Perfect Edition Pollen. I'm calling it, I'm going to call it book.pmd. In fact, I might actually grab more of this. Again, this is, not sure what I think about Robin licensing his prose content under the MIT, if that's even really a thing that you can do or is desirable to do. I've always tried, if I'm releasing a open source project that it happens to include a lot of my own prose, I try and dual license the code separately from the prose. Not sure if that's something that Robin has given much thought to. Or maybe he doesn't care, which would be understandable. There's arguments back and forth. So here is basically all the way down to the chapter titled The Machine I've put into this file. Great. What do we want to do next? Let's grab the CSS. In fact, a simple way to do this. Perfect edition. I'm going to clone this. Copy. Clone this repository. Let's do cd. I have a code directory, and then anything that's not mine, I put code from others. So git clone, and we've got it. CD perfect edition, and there it all is. Okay. I didn't want to necessarily fork Robin's project. I wasn't sure if that would be a good idea or not. I could, but almost none of the file content would be the same, so I wasn't sure if I should start a new repo or fork his and start and make my changes from there. For now, I'm going to start a new repo, and we'll see if I get any feedback one way or the other. But what I've done is I've started a new repository of my own, and I'm going to copy files kind of out of his source directory as I need them. So we have an EPUB template and a web template, and then we have CSS, fonts, images. I'll leave the... I'm probably going to want to look at that YAML file, because I'm probably going to be implementing that metadata some other way. Let's see what's in CSS. Just 2 files. And what's in, of course, the font. Okay, actually, so I'm going to copy the CSS and font files. Got to go up, up, up. Oh, dang it, there's a switch for this. Am I really reduced to this? A. Well, let's just do this. Now that I have it here, I'm going to go CDP per, this is one of my own shortcuts. And now I'm going to make dir CSS, make dir bear with me while I copy some files. Forgot a directory. Source. Okay, do the same for font. Oops. Forgot to make a directory. No matches found. Oh, wrong thing. Okay. Okay, RM, RF, fonts. Okay, we got something started here. Source. Web template.html. Okay. We have our book and we have our template. We don't have a pollen.rkt or pollen.racket file yet. Not sure if we actually need one quite yet at this stage. Let me do this. I want to look at the source code that's being generated here. Just to see if there's anything else I'm aiming for. And particularly, where does it expect to find that CSS file? Because it might be in a different spot. Okay, so it's looking for... Looks like he's had a unique identifier put into the CSS file. And I don't see a need for that myself. Maybe if I look at his Ruby code in more detail, I'll find out what he was working around by doing that. But for the time being, I'm only going to pull up, well, let's do this too. Make a Git repository here. Okay. Now, so this is Emacs. This is my first time using Emacs on the live stream. It's, you know, if you've tuned in before, you've seen me using mainly Dr. Racket. However, Dr. Racket gets kind of slow when I'm streaming. Even as I'm just talking right now, my CPU is at about 60 to 80%. And Dr. Racket has a heavy debugging instrumentation built into it, most of which I do not use. So it was complicated to set up Emacs, but I'm not going to be doing anything in Emacs that you wouldn't be able to do in Dr. Racket. And that was a concern from some people when I mentioned on Twitter that I was going to be doing that. So let's do this. Let's see if this works. I'm going to... Okay, and now I'm going to go to what I want to see is this template. Actually, I want to rename this file. Now I'm already running into, let's close this file. Is there a way to rename a file right from within Doom Emacs? There it is, R. Move file to web template.html.p. The .p is the null file extension for Pollen, so don't think about that too much if you don't understand why I'm doing that. And let's see here. It didn't really rename it. I'll do that from the command line later. Got all this stuff. I'm going to go into Pollen minor mode so that it's easy for me to enter a lozenge character, that is Pollen syntax. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here. I'm going to delete. This is where we want to insert our HTML. So that's what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll make our font bigger here. Trying to keep an eye on the chat. If anyone has any questions, let me know. It's empty so far. But if you're live, you, unlike most of these tend to get viewed by people after I'm done streaming them, which is fine. But if you are watching and you have questions, you have the luxury of asking me those questions and benefiting future generations. So I will not be adverse to answer your questions. We're going to convert to HTML. doc. Well, let's just do it that way. Just do it that way for now. Title HTML. I'm wondering, and now this is where I want to see where for sure it's getting that from. I think it's getting it from the YAML file that I mentioned earlier. Let's take a look at that. There's a title. There's title HTML. So he wanted to be able to customize that HTML on a per book basis. That is, I can see the appeal of that. I'm thinking about how to do that in Pollen. How, at least there's a million ways to do it. Just how am I going to do it? Author. I mean, I could hard code a bunch of these things, but I think I will try and at least I'll be able to illustrate some of Pollen's features if I mirror this functionality. So these might be metas in our book source. Do we get metas in Pollen Markdown? That's a question I have. I think the answer is yes. If I define meta title to be this title, which is a nice long one. Oh, I forgot to make that. So I've escaped using the lozenge into Pollen mode, which was really a racket mode. So anything after the lozenge is interpreted as code. And since I use parentheses right after the lozenge, it's kind of using the standard kind of racket lispy syntax with the parentheses. Now if I run this, I'm going to get the same document as before. It's going to take longer because I added a lot more content in here. But if I type metas, I get a hash. Okay, so I get a hash table that includes the title. So I'll be able to fish that out later on. And actually, what I might do is I'm just going to start ripping out this YAML, and I'm going to start making it book information. Now, again, it's kind of an aesthetic decision. Robin seems to have wanted to separate the metadata from the source for the book itself, and I understand the appeal of doing that. We'll do it this way for now, and we'll see if we want to change it later on. We could do it both ways, but for now I'll just put it right in the book. See, I have multiple lines of text here, and I think I'll use the alternate syntax for this line, which is to use the function name directly after the lozenge and put a string argument as the first one here, and then everything after that gets included in the meta. What am I seeing here? Description. Oh yeah, okay. Let's just do this. Okay, you see what I'm doing here. Now here's markdown source. I'm not going to need that variable because obviously my markdown source is right in here. There's a spot color. Looks very HTML or CSS centric. Close my parentheses here. I could leave the colons on here because colons actually are valid identifier characters in Racket. But I think I'll take them off because they might look funny when I grab them later. because that becomes part of the variable name, I guess, if you will. Here we have a Boolean. True, hash true is how you express true, or you could just do hash T for short in Racket. I'm not sure how many people watching this are going to be coming to this from a new to Racket perspective, so I'm kind of hedging my commentary that way. Okay, pub date. Now another thing I'm not bothering to change right now is that Rob has fallen into the bad Ruby habit of using underscores in his identifiers, whereas Racket has the superior hyphen convention. We'll just leave it that way for now. Now, I didn't need to quote that. It needed to be just a plain value. I'm getting an error at the bottom there. I just want to make sure I understand what is going on there. It doesn't say. If I delete that, am I getting the error still? No, I'm not. So it's somewhere in here. It doesn't. I think I might need to change this up a bit. And I think what's happening is the reader is breaking these actually into separate strings. You can kind of see that sometimes when there are new lines. It doesn't appear that he has any new lines in his markdown source. If I had hard wrapped those lines, you would see those popping up in there. But I think what I need to do is go back here, switch back to the same Lisp that I'm using for everything else. And just have a multi-line string. Okay, there we go. Error gone. Save that. Give her a try. Now, same content as before, but my metas, I have all this information in a bona fide Racket hash table. Again, you don't have to put your metadata in with your book, but especially, you know, the more common Pollen way to do things is to break your book up into chapters. So each file would be a chapter, and then chapters would have titles, certain metadata associated with just the chapter, but not that much. And then, you know, you could have a separate file that defines the metadata. But we're just following his method of putting everything in one. What you see spitting out here whenever I run this program, this document, which is actually a program, it's every Pollen file is actually a program that defines two variables or exports two variables. One is called doc and one is called metas. Doc is this long S expression that you see here with the parentheses. It's a single expression that encompasses the entire document. And these, well, X expressions really are a subset of S expressions, but these X expressions can be easily converted into HTML. I don't know, so if I require, for example, a module that has a function I need, and then I can use the function toHTML doc. It's actually going to produce, it's going to convert that doc into nicely escaped HTML. And that is exactly what we are doing here in this template file. I am right here. Oop, not the thing I wanted. Squiggly lines. Right here. We are basically doing that right in here. The Pollen will insert that HTML into that. And since I now have this meta value, I can also kind of replace this line right here with a line to get the meta. So let me do that. Oop. We're calling it define meta title. Select from metas title. Put the quote mark there. I think, yeah, that's what you need to do. That'll insert the title. Is that really? Oh no, it was the title HTML that he was putting in there, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it was. Okay, I'll save that. What else? Do I really? Okay, so I might. Okay, we got cover image. Select from metas cover image. Might put that in there. Don't see much going on down here. Here is another. Okay, he's got. We're going to have to, here's where the table of contents gets inserted. We're going to have to figure out how he generates that. But let's do, he's putting the title HTML in a second spot here. So I can just put it in that way. Give class equals print cover. Okay, this is probably our minimum viable thing. Document. There's an image file that I should copy over here. Where am I? So let's do that was just that scheme. Oh, there's two. Well, the one that's referenced in the metas is this scheme cover web. So let me grab, I'll put that in the image folder. I think before I post this repo anywhere public, I'll replace the images and the prose so that I'm not copying Robin's prose. This very lovely novel that he worked so hard on. It is not mine, and it is not mine to license or relicense, so regardless of what he says. Let's see here. Didn't need to copy it, I could have just moved it. So I have to delete this one. Okay. Gen the fire, I'm not sure what that is, but I'll put that in there too. Move, gen. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to come up here, I'm going to close. Okay. I want to rename that file. I tried to do it before, it didn't take for some reason. Move, web template, .p. Actually, I'm going to move there. I've renamed it so that Pollen will kind of pick it up. You can specify a custom file name for a template, but I only have a limited. I only have one evening in which to try and do this, so I'm taking the path of least resistance. Okay. If I open that project, it's there still. Okay. I'm almost ready to try it, okay? It would be, now there's going to be a lot missing, but I'm almost ready to try rendering this thing. What would happen if I did? Rayco, Pollen, render. And even without a pollen.racket file. I mean, if it's there, we'll use it, but I'm just using Markdown. I don't really have any special functions. I'm not doing, I'm going to need pollen.racket for a table of contents. And I'm going to need it because the table of contents, I'm sure, is programmatically generated. So let's see what happens here. It didn't render it. No paths to render. I know why. Because book.pmd actually needs to have its target output extension as the penultimate extension. So we actually need book.html.pmd. So I forgot about that. Try again. Now it's doing it. It doesn't like something. Oh, okay. Well, so let's do this. I forgot. Nope, that's not what I want. All the places where I put you have to actually include the word metas in there. Because that is that kind of variable that you're getting from the file is the source of this metas. Now you can have more than one source of metas. That's why we're manually specifying. So why didn't I remember that? That was not smart, but you live and you learn. Right here. I think it was those three. Did I have any more? You know, while I'm in here, I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to make sure we have a nice title here. Select from metas title metas. Okay. Let's try this again. Did it? We now have a book.html. If I open this, it's probably going to be all screwy, but let's give it a shot. And I'm sure enough right that it is not everything I hoped for. Where did it fall down? It's still linking to that goofy CSS file. Let's do this. Web. We can fix that right here. I could actually, it might even be better than re-rendering this every time, is I'm going to close this window. I'm going to use Pollen's built-in web server. So Reiko Pollen start, and okay, we're ready to rock. Let me copy this. So here's the web server. You can see that it's kind of mapping source file to, we can see the source here, or we can see the result. And the web server will know when we have updated the source file. So it'll dynamically kind of re-render the output whenever it senses that we need to do that. Okay, that looks right. So let's see what it looks like. Well, we're getting the right font. Where are we falling down? Are we getting actual, now we're getting HTML in here. There's a class here that is not, this is where we're falling down. There's something going on here. I'm not sure what that is. Let's find that out in here. Did I screw that up? Div class equals book. How about the print cover? No, I see it's in the print cover. So if I go back to the source file, of course I have not escaped my quote mark in there. So again, rookie mistake. Still learning these. Sometimes this doesn't update. See, it's not seeing it in there. There we go. Invalidate cache. There we go. Still running. I'm going to slash that looks right to me. Nothing else I need to escape in there. Okay, let's reload this jobber. It's going to re-render it in the background since the server is still running. Now that actually is pretty darn close. I got some goofiness going on up here because there's some kind of Ruby templating things going on. But we are getting identical results, and I'm pretty happy with that. I didn't know how quickly I'd get to that point. I wonder if this is in the original. So here's the original. Yeah, look at that. If I create there appears to be an edge case in Robin's original where the headings can be split off from the body text. That's a weakness of the web. I'm sure there are ways of getting around that. But at least I know it's not a weakness that I'm introducing. So here we go. Now, at this point, I'm going to take a look at Robin's original Ruby code, and I'm going to try and get a sense for what it's doing, specifically on the website side of things. Web template. Let's see here. Source. So Robin there's a serve.rb, looks like a kind of a minimal project server that he has made for himself, and kind of like Pollen's built-in one. And generate.rb looks to be the bulk of the smarts. Let's see here. He loads book data from the YAML file. He's updating a modified date. He's getting a random GUID. Excuse me. He's making sure that the home URL ends in a slash. Getting a slug. He's making a bunch of folders. Get rid of, so it's housekeeping, basically. Now he's generating the webbook. He builds, he reads in the markdown. He's doing a little bit of widow remover. Pollen has a function for this that is in the kind of unstable area, but it actually is not too bad. And, you know, you notice Robin says, you know, not perfect but good. I mean, this is pretty much the name of the game when it comes to what this is referring to is, in good typesetting, you never want to have a single word on its own line at the end of a paragraph. So what you do is you insert a non-breaking space. Am I getting that? Oh yeah, Control Shift. You insert a non-breaking space between the first and between the last two words in every paragraph, and that forces that last line to have at a minimum those two words on it. So that's what that's about. M-fixer-upper. There are functions. So if I go to Pollen, let's look at the Pollen documentation here. There is a module, and I'm not sure, does he still have these documented? Maybe he might have even removed the documentation for these. Oh, unstable module reference. There we go. Typography. There are some functions in here that do smart dashes. So maybe that would be the first place to start, is re-implementing some of what Robin's doing here in Pollen, the Pollen file. Pollen unstable typography. And here's smart ellipses, wrap hanging quotes. He has a function. I know by digging around in the source, I saw that he had a function at one point in there for, but he has never documented it. It may be that he's not satisfied with how it works. We'll see if we get to that. Let's do this. We'll we've got this going on right now. Let's do this. Let's make our pollen.rkt file. Start building some smarts into this thing. Now, this is where Emacs comes in. I'm in what's called racket mode. I can have a full REPL in here, which is kind of nice. And I can even enter an additional mode where it's showing me all the bindings and kind of where they come from, just like Dr. Racket does. First thing I do in every pollen.racket is you wanted to, anything you define in here, you want it to be available to the other program or the other file. So everything in here is public. That's what that line means. Now, you'll notice, of course, it's kind of hard to see now because the output gets a little cut off. But the first thing you see in doc is this root. And so because everything in Racket can be interpreted as code or data, this is like a document. What we see here with these nested parentheses is a document tree, basically. It's data. But root, we can also define a function root that operates on all of its arguments. So that's kind of the idea behind a tag function. Root dot elements. So the dot, as I've mentioned before, it's called rest notation. So root can accept any number of arguments, which is great because we have a lot of arguments in here. There's a heading, and then there's a paragraph. There's more paragraphs. So it's just going to take whatever arguments you give it. It's going to put them all in a giant list called elements. Now the simplest thing we could do here is output that as a tagged X expression. And of course I should actually require that module up here. Tagged X expression. It's going to be a div tag. So, and then we're going to use no attributes in that div tag, and then pass it the elements. Let's do this. Let's enter bracket XP mode. I'll show you what I'm talking about. See, now when I click on the identifiers, it's showing me where things are coming from. So if I click on elements, it says, oh, that's a local variable that you've defined. Actually, I'm sorry, that's so small. Let's do this for you. So again, it's Emacs. It's complicated to set up. It's a lot of work to get basically the same functionality that I mostly use in Dr. Racket, but it's faster when I'm streaming. It's putting a cross through on root because I'm not actually using root anywhere, so it's not bound. Now I even forget how do I. Oh yeah, F5. So I can get a REPL here. I'm not sure how to make the size bigger without my. Oh, there we go. So if I do root hi and another, it's giving me this kind of expression. So it's wrapping whatever I give it in this list. So what this is effectively going to do is now when if I were to run this now, instead of seeing root at the beginning, I'd see div. But because I have, at this root function, I have visibility into the entire document, I can do some fancy processing. So we're gonna want to do a lot more than this here. We're gonna want to use, let's say we wanted to go back. Whoops, what did I just do? Let's say we're gonna want to go back and re-implement what he was doing here with the. Well, he's got a widow remover. I'm not going to go spelunking for that now, but an m-fixer-upper, let's do that. So what we can do is, since he has these, I prefer, personally, my strong opinion is that if you have m-dashes, n-dashes, smart quotes, just type them that way in the original document. You'll save yourself a world of trouble, and it's not that hard to do. And that way, the source document has it exactly the way you want it. But if you just want to type the normal quote marks and whatever and process it the other way, you can do that too. Let's do this. So, simple way to do this, we'll define new elements, and we will use the decode function. Decode elements. I'll show you what that does because I'm going to end up looking it up myself. You will, if you're getting into Pollen, you'll want to learn about this decode function. So we would take the string proc argument here. I'm going to have to require Pollen unstable typography. And then I can pass it the name of a function that will operate on every single string in the document, every single line of content. The name of that function is, I've already forgotten. The name of that function is smart dashes. So smart dashes wants a string, perfect. So you can see here, if you've learned to read Racket documentation. Sorry, I'm scrolling around here. String proc is the function you pass as this part. It has to be a function that takes a string and returns either an X expression or a list of X expressions. You can do a lot of things with that, but we're just going to pass it the name of this function, smart dashes. Now we have new elements, and we can actually do our let's see what that looks like in practice, and then I'll see if it does anything in the output. What do we have here? Oh, I need another module here. Am I coming up clean? I can check that by looking at this little indicator down here. Let's try it again. Looks like we're good. Now if I try that, I still get that. Now let's see. It's kind of hard to tell in the monospace font, but it's taken my 3 dashes and converted them into an M dash. If I do 2 dashes, it converts it to a single, or to an N dash. So that's working. So this is a common thing that you'll do in your root function in Pollen, is you'll take kind of the whole document and you'll run it through wash it through some final processing. Now let's say we wanted to do more than one of these functions. We don't just want smart dashes. We want ellipses. We want hanging quotes. We want, smart quotes. In fact, let's do smart quotes next. I'm going to make this, well, I can't go too far that way. I forgot about my chat window obscuring part of my window. But I'll go a little further this way. What is the indent region? So instead of doing you can actually use Racket's compose function that returns another function that basically calls all these other functions in order. Now, I don't particularly care what order these are called in, but let's do smart quotes. Okay, need another parentheses there. I'm already getting better performance out of this Emacs, so I'm glad for that. Now that's fine, but what if I put some quotes in here? I have to escape them, obviously. It's trying to give me those in pairs. So now you can see it's turning those, it's not only handling the dashes, it's also doing kind of some smart curly quotes right here around where I've used a straight tick style quotes up here. Okay, let's keep moving. It is now 8 o'clock. We've been at it for an hour. In fact, if I look at the output that we got out of our file, I do see those look like curly quotes to me. How are they getting there? I'm not sure. Maybe they were in the source. Let's try and find some quotes. I wonder if I'm just seeing. I mean, is there a JavaScript that's doing this for me? Because I wasn't doing this before. Not sure what's going on there. However, let me do one other thing though. I'm going to refresh this. Now, Pollen is smart. It knows that if I change this special pollen.rkt file, it knows, okay, this is a dependency of this whole build, so it's going to regenerate this. And I think the server is still running in the background there, so let's just see what we get. And the thing that I wanted to check is to view the page source. So instead of this kind of erroneous root HTML tag, we now have a kind of a nice HTML div tag right here. So so that tells us that it is using this. Oop, can't switch windows like that. That it is using this code that we just wrote to produce the new file. I'm unsure at this point. I think what ideally we would do, since we are basically getting all the HTML that we want, and we're getting the web version in pretty great order. I mean, the dual output target format of capability of Pollen is one of its strengths, in my opinion. But it is going to take a little bit of tunneling and cooking to move on to now building the EPUB version. So as I move down here, that would be the thing that ideally we would at least have two things tonight: the HTML and the EPUB version. I actually have never cooked an EPUB from scratch before, so that was another reason I was excited to dive into this. Now, he says we need a logical map of the HTML to pull out the table of contents. Let's see, how is he building his table of contents? That's probably the next step, actually. So this variable is the logical table of contents. So he's looking for every single level 2 heading in the document, and he's adding those level 2 headings. Now, if I look at the table of contents here, there's nothing. Okay, that makes sense. Now, it's not that hard actually for us to pick out the H2. What he's doing, he's getting the title out of it, and he's substituting underscores for spaces, and he's making sure it's lowercase. I'm already getting a sort, so he's normalizing to create an ID basically, and I'm already getting that for free from Pollen, but it's using hyphens instead of underscores, so I'll keep that in mind. And then so if he's looking for duplicates. Why does he think he might have duplicate? Does he think he might have duplicate headings? If the href has already been seen, add a count to the end. Maybe I can see what he's talking about by looking at his original table of contents here. Yeah, that's a little bit of a mystery to me. I'm not sure why he cares. None of his titles appear to be duplicates, but maybe I'll find out later on. Table of contents items. He's kind of adding to a dictionary, it looks like here. Why don't I do this? I'll look at his original this is his original, and I'm going to scroll down to the source, and I know that he has the HTML source for the table of contents right here. Okay, so he's producing basically an ordered list with, with list items, and they have these target IDs here. So okay, this is pretty simple to do. I don't actually even really need to squint at the Ruby in order to get this result out of Pollen. So what I'm going to do is there's a couple of ways to do this, but simplest way, I think. There is a function provided by Racket. Right here you see we have our doc consists of our big X expression, which is a big soup of, you know, elements with sub-elements with sub-elements with sub-elements. Theoretically, an H2 tag could be at, you know, kind of the root level like it is here, or it could be nested several levels deep, although that wouldn't be good form. But what we want, there's kind of a nice utility function provided by the tagged X expression module, which will kind of split out all of a certain thing that you want from the document. Maybe I'll make a separate helper function for this, and we'll call it define build TOC, call it the doc. I'll call it elements. Okay, I'm already getting, if this is Racket XP mode, I might turn that off. I'm getting kind of these error messages here when I don't have complete statements cooked up. First, within this function, I'm going to actually define a little helper function. Is H2 X, and that is going to be and okay. We want the list. Yeah, oh, I see. Okay, so what we've got here, it's important to kind of clarify, our elements that we're getting are just a list, but what we want to pass into this function is a complete X expression with these elements as its elements. So I'll just make one of those quick. I'm doing it in kind of a verbose way so that it's so is H2. Okay. So what you see here is defined a function that tells me whether X is an H2 X expression. And then I'm passing that function to the splitf thing. So what this will give me is actually a list of all the matching ones, and it'll also give me the document without all of those things. I don't care about about the getting the document without all the matching ones. I don't care about filtering those out, but I do want all the matches. So I'm running at high speed here because I'm trying to cover a lot of ground, but so I'm skipping over some explanations that I'm sure would be useful to you if you're new to Racket. So here we go, headings. So split FTX expression, tagged X expression. This function actually returns two values. You can see the examples in the docs here. When you call this function, you get two results back, and you got to decide how you're going to handle both of them. And you can do that with define values, and I'm just kind of throwing away the first one, but I'm definitely accepting that second one. And then I do that here, and then the, whoop, what did I just do? Okay. Then here I am just taking that headings. That's my return value of this function. I'm going to save this. I'm going to rerun. Now when I run this program again, everything in this Pollen.Racket is available in this program because of convenience things that Racket is doing behind, Pollen and Racket are doing behind the scenes. So if I say what is root, well that's a function. If I say build TOC, that should be available to me as well. Now let's say I run that function that I just wrote on doc. Look at that. I have a list of headings that appear in the document. And they already have IDs in them, so I don't really have to do the normalization part. So our function gives us this list. Now what we want to do is kind of iterate over that list and build some stuff. Instead of H2, we kind of want it to be, an ordered list with list items, and then we want there to be links inside of there. So again, let's instead of returning this value, we're going to do something with it. We're going to use Racket's for list kind of list comprehension mechanism, and we're going to iterate over heading in list. Now I don't have to, I could just say headings here. And then everything in the body here is going to become another item in the list that I create. Actually, what I probably want to do is define TOC links list items. I'll do it that way. Okay, so now I'm in here. I'm going to use some notation that's kind of it's called unquoting or quasi-quoting. It's kind of a way to do what do you call it? Pattern or variable substitution in lists in Racket. So, or in most lists, I believe, have this. So you started with this backtick, and then I'm going to say it's going to be a list item, and the list item is going to have a tag in it. That's just like HTML's a tag. So we've got X expressions here, kind of equivalent of HTML. They're like peanut butter and jelly. And that a tag is going to have an href attribute, and that attribute is I want to get that heading. I want to get that ID out of the H2 tag. What is a good way to do that? I could use the again, it's a quick way to look things up here. attr ref. If we're given a key, it returns the corresponding value. And I can pass it either a list of attributes or the complete expression. So what I can do is, so now I'm in this expression. I use the comma to escape out of it. There. Now I'm grabbing the ID out of that heading and putting it in the, dropping it into the href attribute of this. That's actually not correct because I need to put a hash mark in front of it. You'll notice, in HTML, when you link to these, you gotta have that pound sign right in front there in order to make that kind of an anchor link. So really what I need to do here is string. Let's do a format string. The tilde A is kind of shorthand for insert the next argument into the string here. Okay, I've got my ahref tag. I'm still inside the tag. And now I want to insert the text of the heading. And I believe there's a function for elements as well. I guess I could, see, look at this. This heading here, there are multiple elements to this heading. It's kind of being converted into right single quotes. Oh, see, okay, I understand. Now this goes back to why were we getting typographically correct quote marks even before I had added that functionality into the pollen.racket file, and it turns out that actually the Markdown reader is doing that for us. I'm not sure if it is also generating these, but I don't have enough time to care. So back to here. So what I can do actually is grab all the elements. Get elements. Heading. Now that's going to return a list. What I actually want to do is splice those elements back into the expression here. Remove the list kind of container and just plug the elements as a bag inside this spot in the expression. So that actually looks right. And at the end of this, we would have a list of those. And then we can then wrap up our entire function by saying we want an ordered list with all of these list items. Let's try this again to see that we're getting the output that we want. Okay. Now there I am getting exactly what I want. These are these elements here. Now if let's just say that we want to try and see what that looks like as HTML. I'll require pollen template. Because I'm not requiring it up here, I kind of have to do it in the REPL, and then I'll use that to HTML function build TOC doc. And this is the same thing that we were seeing in there. So it looks like we have a way to get that table of contents now. Where do we want to put it? Actually, I can just use this function right in the template. So let's go back to template, and here is where we want to. This is where Robin is inserting the HTML for the table of contents. So we're going to do our own thing here. We're going to do, again, get the lozenge in there to HTML, build. Now, actually, do I just call doc? I forgot. I think I might need to change the function a little bit here, but since at this point I have the doc available to me, I'll just use the whole doc. And okay, so actually I'm going to change this. I thought that I was going to call this with the elements, but I'm actually going to change this to be a tagged X expression, which could be the doc or anything. Just call it doc. And that simplifies this somewhat too, because now this expression looks simpler. So we're just splitting that doc. That should work. Just thinking here. We have, that's where our table of contents goes. Okay, so hopefully our project server is still running in the background. Localhost up here. I am going to rebuild it. See if we get a table of contents. We do. It doesn't quite land on the exact spot. I'm not sure why that is. There it is there. That might be, why is that happening, I wonder? Does it happen here? Yeah, it happens in his too. So again, a little bit of a bug in the original that I'm faithfully replicating in my own project. Okay, back to Robin's code. He's got his table of contents here. He's injecting it. This is all the work that we've done in Pollen already, or in Racket. Now he's merging it all together. Now he's generating the EPUB. This is the part I'm curious about. We've got about a half an hour maybe left. I mean, I don't have many scheduling constraints tonight, so I can go long, but I'm not sure whether that will be warranted. But let me just get a sense for myself of what he's doing here. He's, again, grabbing all of the... He's okay, so he's inserting these IDs again in here. Again, I don't need to do that. He's converting the HTML to XHTML. And EPUBs. This is a nice thing that Robin has uncovered for us, that EPUBs don't like to see these non-breaking spaces. They want to see the numeric entity. That's an interesting thing that I'm sure caused him a bit of grief before he figured it out. I don't know how I would have done it. I'll have to think about that one. And then there's a data for an EPUB file manifest. That's a nice way of including all the images in the image directory. So he's grabbing all those images. Excuse me. Counter equals 0. Okay, so he has to give. It looks like the EPUB file manifest it wants you to give every item, kind of have an item tag with each ID having a unique ID. He's just using a counter. He needs an href. It needs a MIME type. It depends on the file, and it needs some extra content, which is it's the special property for the cover image. Okay. And then the same idea for fonts. He's doing it all over again for fonts. Is he doing anything? Is there a duplication here that I can remove? He's adding a counter. He's removing this source. Okay, that's fine. Font HTML, font path media type. Okay. Now with the web book, we can use logical TOC items to generate actual HTML that we can insert into the EPUB. Inject, do. Okay, I see. So he's got to create an XHTML file here. Nav template, and then there's this additional TOC file you sometimes need. So here we generate its HTML. So there's a lot of, as expected, there's a lot of little niche edge cases here with EPUB files that he is working around, and that is great. He copies all the files into the build path. He's doing some recursive copying. And then zipping all the files together. The annoying requirements for the MIME type file must be the first item in the zip archive, and it has to be uncompressed. That is interesting. I'm curious, so let's see if Racket has anything for doing zipped files to begin with. If it does, then I'm going to sketch out a broad kind of approach to doing all of this, and then we'll see how far I get. And if I do not get to all of it tonight, it will be in the repository that I upload some point after this evening's session. Okay, compression and decompression. There is a bzip2 input and output, but I don't think that's what I want. That's pretty simple. Zippers, that's something else. That's kind of a functional concept that is a high performance functional programming equivalent of a linked list or a double linked list. Interesting. Compression and decompression. Well, does anyone know if Racket has a method for zipping files? I'd be shocked if it didn't. It has everything else. Maybe we turn to the mighty Google. That's right, I don't need to do that on here. Racket zip compression. The bzip thing might work if I had, oh, here we go, zip file creation. Okay, good. I thought it would be in here. Provides utilities of zip archive files, which are compatible with both Windows and Unix, including macOS unpacking. Now, what I want to know is, because in here it appears that we have to zip exactly one file as an uncompressed file. Can I control that? Now, of course, you know, Robin is not actually doing this. I notice he's not actually doing this with Ruby code. He's basically just executing a shell command that calls the zip command, you know, in the shell. So I could do that. I could always resort to that. Let's see here. Timestamp, path string, get timestamps, run in the path of systype. There's zip and gzip. It doesn't appear that that is, you know, I'll probably uncover it later on, but I'm not seeing parameters that I can use to directly control the level of compression on a per file basis. So we're going to probably do the same approach that Robin did and call out to the shell for that bit. Okay. Now, so broadly, what does it appear like? I'm going to start building this out here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to tidy these requires. There's a key for that, and I can never remember what it is. It kind of sorts them for you, and it does nice indentation and things. That's something that Dr. Racket doesn't do. First, we got to tell Pollen that we can do EPUB files, that we want to be able to do EPUB files. The way you do that is by creating a setup module in your Pollen.racket, and in that module you can define variables that tell Pollen how to behave if you want to override the defaults. Here we go. Set up poly targets. Default poly targets. So instead of the default is just HTML. That's, you know, the default for Pollen is that it's going to assume that all you want is HTML files. But default poly targets HTML and EPUB. Okay, and we just we have to provide that since this is another module. So okay, see from my check mark that we're good. That's the first thing we do. Now root going to need to treat our document differently depending on whether we're currently targeting an HTML or an EPUB file. I don't know. I don't think so. Okay, so here's a way that we're going to approach this. I'm going to create a new file called template.epub.p. And this template is going to spit out the completed EPUB file. Now the way that this works is, the way that templates work in Pollen is, they can be mostly text, as in the case of an HTML template. But you can actually use a template to create any binary file format if you can generate that file in code. All that needs to be done is that you generate, you know, a temporary file usually somewhere, and then you emit the bytes of that file, and Pollen takes those and saves those to your target file. So I'm in a Pollen Miner mode here. This is my template.epub.p. Broadly, what we want to do is and I'm going to take my pattern by something that Matthew does in the docs for this. I can demonstrate what he's talking about in the 4th tutorial where he demonstrates how to generate PDF files. Here is the template for the PDF file. You can see it's actually a bunch of, there's really no text content to the PDF file. It's using Racket code to create some strings, emit those strings to a temporary file. It runs a system command on that temporary file, and then it grabs all the bytes out of that file, and that is the return value of the template. So I'm going to be taking that same approach here. The probably simplify things if we just kind of make an outline of everything that that is relevant that Robin's doing here. So let's go back up here. We know how to get the HTML. We can substitute out. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to define the doc XHTML. Okay, that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to have to do the replace. Now let me make this big again for you. Replace NBSP non-breaking spaces with. We're going to have to do that. We're going to have to grab a list of all the images in the image directory. We're going to have to assign MIME types. Build an image list HTML string from these, and that's going to be ID href media type. Now ID href media type. And then we're going to do the same thing for fonts. We don't have to assign MIME types, they're all the same type. Sorry, I have font list. Let's go back quick and look at the template itself. Content template, meta inf. Ooh. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's right. What I'll probably, so we'll just take this whole thing. There's the content template. There's also nav template. So, you know, this the way that you kind of do this is define content template string append and right in here you can do same thing as before. Select from metas title metas. Why isn't it letting me insert a Thank you. Okay. Going back to the code here. Same but for fonts. Okay, so here's the additional table of contents file. So there's a couple of kind of extra files that it's generating here. Now we render out the actual book content. It's taking that content template, squirting the HTML into that, pulling it out here, and then the manifest. There's a lot of fiddly bits in here, and so I'm not sure how far I'm going to get on this. But what I'm thinking I will do tonight, actually, and I'm not seeing any questions, is I'm going to probably do a lot of this work offline and then build out or put it in a repository on GitHub. And for our next Pollen time, we can take and kind of go on a tour through that. Again, yeah, that's probably going to be as far as we get tonight. I'm pretty happy that we got the web. The web one, the web is always, you know, that's kind of the native one. Building out the EPUB is going to be fiddly, but it is what it is. I don't think we're going to be able to finish that tonight. So that's what I'll do. I'll plan to do that. Now, in case you're still watching, we still have all of our, you know, what we do on Pollen Time. What we've mainly been working on is kind of an example pollen project called the Pollen Cookbook, and I have been working on that since the last time that I had one of these sessions. I added a chapter down here on how to generate automatic links into the Racket documentation. Not to say that, you know, you're necessarily going to be doing this a lot if you're not writing about Racket, but it's kind of cool. With this kind of markup, you can just say, okay, Racket, and then use this match function, and it generates this very deep link right into the Racket documentation talking about that particular function. And you'll notice in the Racket documentation, every time there's a code example, every single function is actually a hyperlink to the documentation for that function. So this is kind of one of Racket's advantages of its documentation system. And you can access that in Pollen. I built a chapter in there. I've also, I'm not sure if I've talked about this yet, but about the navigation kind of features that you might want in an online book. But each of these chapters kind of talks about, you know, the kinds of markup you can design in Pollen, and then the output you can get with it. What I'd be interested to see is once we get the dual web EPUB format working. And by the way, so let's do this. Stop the Pollen server. Let's go back here. Now you'll notice, you remember that to make the book, I just said Reiko Pollen render book.html. When the EPUB template is finished, you would do the same thing and just say book.epub, and it would create the EPUB file. And so, but what I'm curious to see is once we have both formats working, what kinds of additional functionality we could build into a book that would be more than just the simple markdown, and we could include our you know, some custom functionality in there. Anyways, there it is, another evening of Pollen cookery. We got as far as we could, I think, in a reasonable amount of time. I will put the stuff I have so far in a repo here tonight yet, and so that you can look at it if you want to. And yeah, it was an ambitious thing to bite off, but I think we got as far as we could. Anyways, hope you're all doing well, and if you have any questions, contact me on Twitter. I'm just Joel D. And you can also see the links that I'll be putting. I'll be updating the description of this video with some relevant links as well, in case you want to keep tabs on this. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and including our future viewers. And we'll be seeing you next time. Hopefully it will be less than a month.